Sorry for stopping. That was experimental. So today, on Top 2 Day, we're diving into the best films about real serial killers. I've crafted a unique lineup. We'll compare real-life events with how cinema portrayed them. Unfortunately, I've skipped TV shows for now, but there will be a huge video covering all types of monsters in the future. So if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's go! Citizen X, 1995. Citizen X is a restrained investigative thriller about Andrei Chikatilo, the Rostov Ripper, one of the most notorious serial killers in history. From the very beginning, the film shows the long, exhausting hunt for a man who managed to hide in plain sight for over a decade. Chikatilo was outwardly ordinary. At one point, he worked as a school teacher, later taking low-profile jobs that allowed him to blend into everyday life. Despite suspicions that followed him even in school, he consistently managed to evade justice. Between 1978 and 1990, he murdered at least 52 people, mostly women and children, luring them from train stations, forests, and rural areas. His crimes were brutal, involving stabbing, mutilation, and clear signs of sadistic behavior. Jeffrey DeMunn plays Andrei Chikatilo, delivering a disturbingly restrained and unsettling performance. You might recognize him as Dale Horvath from The Walking Dead. But in Citizen X, he transforms completely, portraying Chikatilo as a quiet, seemingly harmless man hiding unimaginable brutality beneath an ordinary exterior. His performance avoids exaggeration or theatrical madness. Instead, it relies on subtle gestures, calm speech, and an almost uncomfortable normality. The film doesn't glorify him or dwell on graphic violence. Instead, DeMunn's portrayal emphasizes deception, manipulation, and the chilling reality of how a predator can blend into society unnoticed for years. The film accurately captures the struggle of connecting disparate murders into a pattern and building a psychological profile without modern tools. It also shows how poorly the investigation functioned overall. It portrays repeated dead ends, false leads, and the mental toll on investigators. One of the most chilling truths from reality, which the film portrays effectively, is that during Operation La Sapalosa, a large-scale manhunt involving many investigators and patrols, Chikatilo repeatedly eluded capture. He was questioned multiple times and even participated in search efforts, combing the territory as part of the investigation, effectively hiding in plain sight. In the real case, Alexander Kravchenko was wrongly executed after confessing under pressure during the investigation. His confession was largely accepted because he had a prior conviction. At the age of 18, he had previously been imprisoned for the murder of a young girl, which made him an ideal suspect in the eyes of investigators. This tragic miscarriage of justice underscores how deeply flawed the investigation became. The film also highlights a disturbing and widely discussed episode in which another suspect dies in custody, taking his own life in his cell. While this case was never fully resolved, it reinforces a grim reality. Long before Andrei Chikatilo was finally caught, investigative failures had already added at least 2 innocent victims to his true death toll. While the film simplifies timelines and merges several investigators into composite characters, and some breakthroughs appear faster than they did in real life, it does an excellent job of portraying the procedural weight, persistence, and frustration involved in the case. Profiling errors and flawed assumptions in reality delayed Chikatilo's capture far longer than shown, but the essence of the struggle, that stopping him required relentless observation and careful reasoning, remains true. It's worth noting that, despite the overall attention to detail, there are minor inaccuracies in the depiction of the Soviet setting, from signage on stores to investigators sporting unusually long hair, but these do not detract from the film's intense and authentic portrayal of the investigation. Citizen X avoids graphic violence and sensationalism, instead building tension through repetition, careful work, and the slow accumulation of evidence. It's not a perfect reconstruction, but it captures the emotional and procedural reality of a prolonged manhunt, showing how a killer can survive for years simply by appearing ordinary. Golden Glove, 2019. Okay, so this film is genuinely disturbing and definitely not for everyone. It's deeply uncomfortable to watch. And honestly, it might be one of the best anti-alcohol movies ever made. Golden Glove, Der Goldene Handschuh, is a grim, unflinching crime film based on the true story of Fritz Honka, a German serial killer who stalked and murdered vulnerable women in Hamburg's red light district in the early 1970s. The movie adapts Heinz Strunk's novel and takes viewers deep into the seedy underbelly of St. Pauli, where drink, desperation, and decay become everyday reality. Fritz Honka was not a calculated genius or a charismatic predator. He was a deeply flawed, alcohol-consumed loner with a distorted face, a lisp, and limited social standing. In real life, he murdered at least 4 women between 1970 and 1975, meeting them in bars like the infamous Golden Glove pub, inviting them back to his apartment, and then killing and dismembering them. The film captures this pattern faithfully. He spends most of his time drinking, stumbling through life, and luring women who, like him, are marginalized and forgotten. Jonas Dassler's portrayal of Honka is horrifyingly effective. He embodies the character's ugliness, misery, and internal rot so fully that it feels like an anthropological study of a broken man rather than just a fictional killer. The movie spares few details of Honka's physical and psychological degradation. The cramped, filthy apartment, the smell of decay, and the way the protagonist tries to mask it with air fresheners and denial, all of which reviewers and viewers have noted feel overly real and immersive. Where Golden Glove diverges from a standard biographical crime drama is in its relentless atmosphere of disgust and entropy. There is no clear moral arc, no satisfying resolution of justice, and no deep psychological analysis of why Honka became a killer. Instead, the film forces the audience to sit with the grim reality of his actions and environment. In the real case, the police eventually connected the murders through patterns and physical evidence hidden in Honka's apartment. Unlike some serial killer films that glamorize or speculate about motive, Golden Glove intentionally avoids explaining why he killed. It's more concerned with showing what the killings looked like and how they fit into the chaotic life of a man driven by impulse and alcohol. Angst, 1983. Angst is an intense, unrelenting psychological horror film from Austria that throws you straight into the chaotic mind of a killer almost immediately after his release from prison. It's based on the real-life crimes of Austrian mass murderer Werner Kniesek, a man who, after being paroled early, went on to commit a series of brutal murders that shocked the country. From the opening moments, the unnamed killer, played with disturbing dedication by Irvin Leder, is driven by a compulsion to kill that feels instinctive rather than calculated. Released after a decade in prison for murder, he instantly begins to seek out victims, failing first with a taxi driver before stumbling upon an isolated house where an elderly woman, her daughter, and a disabled son live. What follows is a harrowing sequence of violence that the film depicts without glamour or commentary, instead placing the viewer inside the killer's perspective so that we experience his actions almost as he does. Unlike most crime movies that build suspense through clever plotting or cat-and-mouse tension, Angst shakes the structure. The protagonist is not a genius mastermind. He is clumsy, impulsive, and driven by raw urges rather than cold calculation. His murders don't follow a tidy pattern, and his behavior often seems random and chaotic, which makes the film feel eerily real and unpredictable. The movie's cinematography, often using camera placements strapped to actors and tight, disorienting angles, heightens this experience, forcing you into the killer's headspace. His inner monologue, delivered in voiceover, reveals a fractured psyche shaped by a troubled past, neglect, abuse, and social isolation. The result is not a sensationalist slasher, but a claustrophobic descent into the psychology of violence. The real case of Werner Kniesek shares some elements with the film's narrative. After being temporarily released from prison, Kniesek did commit multiple murders, including killing a family of 3 in St. Polten in 1980. Angst doesn't follow every factual detail of Kniesek's life, but it captures the raw, instinctive violence and the disturbing sense of a person driven by impulses he barely understands. When it first premiered, Angst was banned or heavily censored in several European countries because of its unflinching depiction of brutality. It wasn't widely available for decades, gaining cult appeal only after later home releases. There's no safety net here, no moralizing narrator or reassuring resolution. The film ends with the killer being apprehended almost casually, a moment that underlines how banal and unglamorous such violence can be. Monster 2003. 2003 Monster is an intense biographical crime drama based on the real-life story of Aileen Wuornos, one of the most infamous female serial killers in American history. The film follows her short but violent killing spree between 1989 and 1990, when she murdered 7 men along Florida's highways, crimes for which she was ultimately convicted and executed in 2002. Charlize Theron delivers a transformative performance as Wuornos, gaining weight, shaving her eyebrows, and using prosthetics to disappear into the role, a portrayal that won her the Academy Award for Best Actress. The movie also stars Christina Ricci as Selby Wall, a character based on Wuornos' real-life girlfriend, Tyria Moore, though the film changes her name and some details for dramatic purposes. In Monster, Aileen is introduced as a hardened sex worker living day-to-day in Florida. After a violent encounter with a client who assaults her, she kills him in what the film frames as self-defense, a moment that becomes the turning point in her spiral into killing. From there, she begins to target other men she encounters while working the highways, rationalizing her actions as retaliation or self-protection, and taking their money and cars to support herself and Selby. The movie doesn't just show the killings, it also explores Aileen and Selby's complicated, codependent relationship. Selby starts as a naive woman seeking love and stability, but as the murders mount, her trust in Aileen erodes. She eventually cooperates with police, including over phone calls recorded from jail, which helps lead to Wuornos' arrest, a real-life detail the film dramatizes but stays broadly true to. Where Monster aligns with reality is in its emotional and psychological grounding. Wuornos did have a deeply traumatic early life, including abuse and hardship that shaped her worldview and behavior, and she ultimately confessed to the killings. However, the film also takes liberties. Court records suggest not all murders involved self-defense, and some victims had no history of assault, meaning the real case was more complex and darker than the film sometimes implies. Despite these simplifications, Monster remains powerful because it doesn't just depict violence. It shows a flawed human being shaped by trauma, fear, love, delusion, and desperation. Zodiac 2007. Zodiac, directed by David Fincher, is one of the most intense and meticulous serial killer films ever made, based on the true story of the Zodiac Killer, a still unidentified murderer who terrorized Northern California in the late 1960s and early 1970s. The killer is believed to have murdered at least 5 confirmed victims, though he claimed responsibility for many more in taunting letters sent to newspapers and police. The film doesn't follow a simple thriller formula. Instead, it tracks the obsessive hunt for the Zodiac through the eyes of Robert Graysmith, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, along with real investigators like Dave Toschi, Mark Ruffalo, and crime reporter Paul Avery, played by Robert Downey Jr. It shows how the case pulled these men deeper and deeper into the mystery, consuming their lives and relationships without ever offering a clear resolution. One of the most chilling things about the real Zodiac case, and what the film captures so well, is the killer's taunting letters, ciphers, and cryptic messages sent to the San Francisco Chronicle and other papers. These included coded messages that baffled authorities for decades, and one of the most famous cryptograms was finally decoded in 2020, revealing a chilling message about having lots of fun trying to catch me. The actual murders included attacks on couples and a taxi driver, with some victims left dead and others surviving to provide testimony. The Zodiac's use of both shootings and stabbing, along with his habit of sending parts of bloody clothing to newspapers, made him uniquely terrifying and unforgettable. Where Zodiac the film aligns with reality is in its focus on frustration, obsession, and ambiguity. The investigation did span years, with police and civilian researchers chasing leads, decoding messages, and interviewing suspects. One of the most discussed suspects, Arthur Lee Allen, appears in the movie and in Graysmith's books as a major person of interest, but in real life, there has never been conclusive evidence tying him to the crimes, and DNA and handwriting tests ultimately failed to match him to the Zodiac letters. This is one of the biggest differences between the movie and reality. The film strongly implies Allen may have been the killer, following the theory popularized by Graysmith's books, while real law enforcement has never definitively identified the Zodiac. The case officially remains unsolved, and the killer's identity continues to be a subject of debate among experts and amateur sleuths alike. Another difference is that Zodiac sometimes compresses timelines and dramatizes relationships. For example, real Graysmith and fellow investigator Paul Avery were not as close in real life as the movie portrays. But in terms of scene accuracy, murder attacks, letters, and investigative details, the film is praised for its historical realism, even if it embraces ambiguity rather than closure. Zodiac doesn't give you a neat ending or a solved mystery. Instead, it leaves you with the same unresolved tension that haunted investigators for decades, the sense of a cat and mouse game without a clear end, and a reminder that sometimes the truth remains just out of reach. Even recently, a TikTok user claimed that his grandfather was the Zodiac killer, sparking a wave of online speculation. However, no evidence has confirmed this, and it remains just another theory in a long line of guesses about the killer's identity. It seems likely that for years to come, people will continue to speculate, investigate, and try to uncover new clues. And who knows, maybe one day the full truth will finally be revealed. So that's it for today. What do you think about this format? I'd love to hear your thoughts. What's your favorite movie about a serial killer? Share your opinion in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more. That was Top 2 Day. See you in the next one.